everybody. Welcome to the second episode of Not Being Governed on the Voluntary Virtues Network. We're here every Sunday from 3 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm the host, Daniel Hawkins. This episode is part two of just a two-part kind of thing I'm doing on the fascist parties of Europe, what they're about, where they come from. So this will be a continuation of that. So I guess just before I launch into that, the only reason why I'm doing this second episode is because last time I felt that I didn't have adequate time, I guess, to delve into the kind of lines of thinking that surround ethnocentrism and that kind of thing, and nationalism. So I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit more, and also talk about the anarchist alternative to not only political parties, because that's what kind of I discussed last time, but to the whole concept of ethnicity, of race, and nationality. And my personal take on that, and what some other anarcho-capitalists and voluntarists think about that. So that's what this episode is going to be about. Again, this is the second episode, so just like last time, if there's anything, if I have any like facts wrong, or if you just have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. I guess either on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you find the video. Just let me know, or it will be up on notbeinggoverned.com for sure, so you can comment there if you want, and do check out all of the other essays that are up this week. So yeah. So last time I talked about how these nationalist and ethnocentrist and Eurocentrist parties kind of have been becoming more and more popular as radical Islam, just immigration in general has risen. The economies have been getting a lot worse. You have austerity, and a lot of people are blaming problems in Europe, especially, on immigrants. Doesn't necessarily matter that they're Muslim, but the terrorism aspect and the war aspect that accompanies that whole thing, especially in recent years, is a big part of it. And you and I both know that blaming a whole group of people for problems like, economic problems and that kind of thing is just plain irrational, but we also know that these problems generate from the state and from just government activities. You have governments starting wars, which then create a credit boom, and an artificial boom that's created by usually fiat currencies, and then you have a bust that follows that, and credit tightens. Things get more expensive as you have a lot more inflation. So the whole thing just repeats over and over. And of course, wars are also fought to bring in cheaper goods, and you have a lot more, protectionism kind of goes hand in hand with actually welfare states and warfare states, of course, which we also know go hand in hand, contrary to what most history teachers will tell you. Governments that rely on a lot of welfare for their populace also rely on warfare abroad. It's basically a self-perpetuating cycle. So all of these problems, when it comes down to it, originate with the state. They don't originate with any certain group of people. And of course, this alarms people who are even remotely familiar with history, just thinking about the Holocaust and how the Nazi Party, particularly Hitler, drummed up. And I mean, it wasn't just them. We should definitely note it was pretty much all of Europe. It wasn't just Nazi Germany and also the USA. Um, Pretty much the whole West blamed a lot of economic problems after World War One on Jews. Um, and that isn't to say that there weren't Jewish banking organizations or finance organizations that, I mean, organizations that were run by Jews that weren't causing issues, because that would just also be unfair to say there were. Um, but to shift the blame entirely to Jews as a group versus people who happen to be Jewish uh, would not be accurate. So definitely want to get that right uh, first off. So now we have kind of a similar situation where immigrants come and take our jobs. Of course, we're familiar with that sentiment here of immigrants coming and taking our jobs, even though we know, um, going back to Karl Menger and Eugen von Baumwerk, that there's no fixed pie especially as far as jobs go. So that whole thing is just a fallacious argument. But in Europe, they definitely buy it. And as austerity is kicking in from borrowing way too much money, the IMF is in complete trouble. The World Bank is in a whole heap of trouble. They're causing a lot of wars and engaging in a lot of wars in Africa in particular to help ease the debt that a lot of these countries are in, especially France, going into Mali and Algeria, in Nigeria now. They're in trouble, and then when austerity kicks in, they see it as the fault of immigrants, because to them, immigrants are putting a big strain on their welfare system when they believe it should only be going to Europeans who have been, I guess, paying into the welfare system for a number of years. Of course, that argument would only be true if the money that you paid to the government went to your own kind of little, deposit box, and you were able to pick what things you funded and didn't fund, but that's a market. That's not taxation. That's not how government works. So the whole thing's wrong to begin with. But just down to the philosophy of blaming this group is such a huge collectivist logic leap. Just doesn't make any sense when you even examine it, not even with a microscope. You can examine it with, the naked eye. This does not take more than 10 minutes of thought to realize that blaming every immigrant for this problem, or every Muslim, or every Indian, or every, Mexican, or every, person of Hispanic descent for causing this thing is just ridiculous. I mean, that's really, it's preposterous. It's really just the stupidest thing. Um, so, what I wanted to talk about more is to get down into our ideas of ethnicity and how ethnocentrism becomes a thing, and how nationalism becomes a thing, how people have gravitated toward those ideas over time, and now they're viewed as kind of natural tendencies. And then when they manifest themselves in the form of war, in the form of xenophobia, and ethnic cleansing, displacement, that kind of thing, it's not really viewed as such a horrible thing. Obviously, it is, through the lens of the Holocaust and through the lens of other genocides, but the tendency, or I guess it's a habit. It's more viewed as a human habit to want to stick to your own group, um, with people who are similar to you, uh, and to kind of push away people who are different. And in doing that, you form, if you mix the whole social contract theory into the theory that we are all geared toward our own race or our own ethnicity, and protecting people of our own race or our own ethnicity. When you mix a social contract theory into that, you get a really good and seemingly reasonable rationale for not only the state, but for a fascist state. Or I guess the more proper term would be nationalist, or whatever term you want to apply in place of fascist. So let's examine that first. There is something, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video. I don't think I did, but in case you're not familiar with it, there have been a lot of studies that have been done over the last few decades, on something called the other race effect, where a lot of times they will stick kind of two babies in a room, or a bunch of babies in a room, I guess. Some of them will be of the same race, some of them will be of different races, and then they'll see that some babies will naturally gravitate toward babies of their own race. Excuse me. So the goal of that is to kind of point out, or to measure whether race is an entirely social construct, and whether racism, that is, putting your own race first, is a natural human tendency. But there have also been other studies done that kind of show evidence contrary to this, or kind of explain it in a different way, called the cross-race effect, where it's not so much about the race of the other babies as a lot to do with what as a baby, what your parents look like. So you'll probably gravitate toward people that you've already been familiarized with, and it might be genetic a little bit, of course, and you might be more geared toward that, but also something that a lot of anthropologists and people, sociologists and stuff, have been looking at, is that actually some people, that humans might be more disposed toward mating with someone of a very different gene pool, which makes perfect sense. And the whole idea of breeding with your own ethnicity, not the wisest thing as far as biodiversity and just human longevity goes as a species. If Hitler had his way and left only the Nordic stock, the Teutonic stock of Europe left, and maybe some Gallo-Romans, you would be left with a tiny, absolutely minute portion of the human genome. You'd be left with such an unvaried genetic makeup that we would probably all be extinct and sterile. We'll be extinct by some point, but we'd all be sterile, probably handicapped, blind, and deaf within a number of a few generations, because mating with people of a different gene pool that are still part of the human species increase the chance for biodiversity, increase the chance that your baby will have a better immune system, be immune to different diseases than you are. It's just generally a good thing for the species as a whole, and for your baby's health. Not that I'm neither advocating it nor condemning it, but it's the idea of ethnocentrism as far as genetics go is, it should not logically, and hasn't been shown to be entirely, a genetic predisposition. And so that's pretty much just a falsehood. And nationalism that is being more predisposed, or I guess disposed, if you're not talking genetics, toward people of your own nation. That is not speaking of a government necessarily or a country necessarily, but a nation as defined by a group of people with similar characteristics and culture and language. Um, it does have historical support behind it for sure. But at the same time, we should go back and look at human history. Obviously, like I said, the show is going to be a lot about history. If you hate history, probably shouldn't watch the show. I'm sorry to say. There are plenty of other awesome shows on VVN to watch, so go watch those if you hate history. And if you're kind of open to the idea of learning more about history, or if you think you might be interested in it now, I guess watch the show. I hope I can make it interesting. But anyway, so going back pretty far, not awfully far, pretty far in human history, looking at like the Phoenicians, there's no real evidence to support the idea that the Phoenicians had a central government, or definitely not a well-defined border for a government to have a geographical monopoly in. So, and they were some of the most successful tradespeople, some of the first free marketeers in human history. And the Phoenician trade empire, I guess empire is kind of a misnomer, but the trade empire that the Phoenicians had stretched all the way to Spain, North Africa, all through the Mediterranean. Awesome sailors, awesome, merchants. And that was pretty darn early in human history if you're talking about that, thousands of years BC. So they went to all these other countries, and when they did that, they intermarried with a lot of the people that were there. And since a lot of those, places, there wasn't any formalized education system, there was no pop culture, there was no mass media. So the idea that you could indoctrinate a child into thinking that immigration is good, if you're thinking from the standpoint of a neo-Nazi or someone like that, that are part of these new parties, you are probably going to say that, oh, well, the idea of diversity and racial diversity, cultural diversity is a liberal social construct that's been indoctrinated into our children through the public school system and through the mass media, MTV, and blah, blah, blah. So this is before all that, and it still happened. It was still a very good thing for people around that time to intermarry with people from other tribes and other nations. The Phoenicians in particular, because they were not a warring people, as far as we know, as far as I know. Obviously, again, if you find something to the contrary, I'm fine with being corrected. So, and of course, we have other societies, the ancient Somalians, just lots of other groups, the Irish and stuff, that were really good merchants that weren't really warring people, but still managed to, the Harappans too, definitely the Harappans, still managed to cross over into other societies and kind of mix with them, and it was a generally good thing. And the main thing that comes to mind is Zomia, and talking about this whole kind of massive land in southern and Southeast Asia, up into China, where a lot of nomadic tribes live, and there are just dozens and dozens and dozens of different ethnic groups and cultural groups that live up there, in pretty much, as far as anyone knows, peace. We don't know if any of them feud or whatever is happening with that, but we do know that these people who are essentially stateless, uh, most of them are not even citizens of anywhere. Um, they're definitely not administered by the governments of those countries to any remarkable degree. Um, they get along fine, and they have um, basically a melting pot type of culture, you know. And I do want to point out that I mean, there are a lot of ANCAPs, a lot of voluntarists and stuff who say that culture itself uh, is a collectivist term and that it doesn't really exist, and that we've been taught to believe that culture exists, but really um, we're all individuals with our own likes and desires, and that whatever creative products or whatever that we make are our own, and that there is no definable thing such as culture. I can definitely see where that argument comes from. I can definitely be sympathetic to it and understand it. I don't think it's entirely true. Cultures have existed in stateless societies, so culture is not a product of the state. Um, as far as we know, it's not necessarily a product of collectivist thinking. In fact, I mean, this is my opinion, and yes, I am a voluntarist, and yes, I'm an individualist, but collectivism to an extent does appear to be a pretty basic human instinct, a basic human tendency to find a group of people similar to you and join in with them. Uh, and that happens in just free markets. And essentially, what society, a free society, is a market for association. You may not get necessarily anything tangible out of a conversation with someone, or a friendship with someone or whatever. Um, you might, but you wouldn't necessarily get that. So you're not trading anything tangible, but it's still free association. And as we see from free association, similarity and finding groups similar to you and just generally forming groups um, is a pretty natural human tendency. So, you know, people aren't atomistic. And as Murray Rothbard said, you know, his view, and kind of borrowing from Mises, is that his view of humanity, especially given, you know, a state of humanity in a free society, would be not atomistic, but they would be individuals forming their own connection. And if you've seen, there's this picture that's going around like on Facebook. It's been around for a while, where there's like one picture. I guess it's over here for you guys. That has like, it says centralized network, and then there's decentralized network, and then there's what is it called? Distributed network. So, and then the centralized network, you have this big node, and then there are all these little points that come off of it, you know, in like a big circle. And then there's decentralized network, that's like a few nodes with smaller ones coming off of them. And then with distributed network, all of these points are connected to each other and they overlap with each other sometimes. But there's no central like node. And that's essentially what society has been over the course of history, in spite of the state. And the state likes to invent culture. Well, it likes to invent cultural protection. Um, it likes to pretend that your group is different from everybody else, and not just different, but better. So I believe everyone is different. I believe all groups are different. I don't believe that any one group is better than another, you know, intrinsically better. And that's what the state wants you to believe. Because as long as they can get you to believe that your group is better and other groups are worse, then you can gravitate toward your own group and to the authority figures within your group and be afraid of all the other ones. And the more you're afraid of the other groups, the stupider you'll be. Essentially, you won't learn anything. You won't gain anything out of them. You'll be intellectually, linguistically, religiously, economically, dependent on the authority figures within your own group. That's why the Harappans were so just night and day difference from the Babylonians. They had contact with each other. The Harappans, it appears, did not have a government to speak of at all. And the Babylonians, obviously, very, very, very centralized government, got more decentralized at times, but definitely a night and day difference as far as the freedom of the people goes, as far as the wisdom and just the intellect and creativity of the people goes. The Harappans basically invented money, coins, on their own, permanent housing and all these things, irrigation and municipal privatized water, unbelievable things that were just unfathomable for most societies at that point in history. And same with a lot of other stateless societies. Going back, you can look at all these innovations that they came up with, that a society that is just looking inward on itself, you have this thing called groupthink, they are definitely subject to that, especially when there's an authority figure around who wants to nurse fear of other groups so they can keep having wars. War is dependent on the fear of other people. It's a, you don't want to think of them as humans, you want to think of them as bugs, that you need to be afraid of and step on them. They don't serve a purpose to you, like we're afraid of spiders, until you kind of learn why they're good for the ecosystem. You want to just crush them all and hate them, and you don't want them in your house especially. So, yeah. So, as I said, cultural supremacy, racial supremacy, ethnic supremacy, is a fiction that's just been thought up, out of nowhere. It has no logical basis other than what the government tells you. And all the stateless societies that I've ever researched are pretty open societies who are all for trade with other people and learning from them and, gaining more experience. And that's what a free market is going to be about. You want to solve the problems with austerity and all these things, don't focus on, oh, this group is to blame and we're better. Learn from each other, and especially with trade, you need diversity in all things. So, yeah. I hope you guys got something good out of this video. Again, suggestions are welcome. Thanks for watching. Check out all the other channels and shows and stuff. I'll see you guys next week.